Hi, welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to be going over some cake pop basics. So you're going to need some baked cake, and you're also going to need a fork to crumble it up. Then you're going to need some buttercream or other type of icing and a scoop to help you roll them in a nice uniform and even shape. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to want to crumble up your cake. So these are some cake shavings left over from leveling another cake I had from an order. I did have these in my freezer. So I have let them thaw and come to room temperature before I started this process. And then some of these cakes that I'm using are left over from some cake samples that I baked for a wedding cake tasting. So I'm just gonna unwrap and put those all into a bowl. And you can kind of see here, I bake my cakes with parchment or wax paper in the bottom. So make sure you get all that peeled off. And then the next step is just to start crumbling it up. So I always start by crumbling it with a fork first, and then I will switch to crumbling it with my hands. And I'm wearing gloves for mostly to keep it nice and clean, but also I don't like the way it feels on my hands. So I've got it crumbled and I'm starting to kind of pinch it to see if I've got any moisture in there so I can determine about how much frosting I'm going to use. So I've decided this is a pretty moist cake, so I'm going to start by putting about a tablespoon of buttercream into there, and then I'm just kind of mushing it all together. Basically what you're going for is kind of a Play-Doh consistency. Some cakes are moist enough that you really don't need much buttercream at all. Or you also can use a ganache, or you can use a jam or a jelly or anything like that to help kind of make that dough. But you're just going to work it through with your hands, and I'm periodically squeezing it pretty tightly, and that is just going to help me determine when it's ready. Like, I'm putting this together and it looks like it's holding its shape pretty well, and as I roll it in my palms, it's holding its shape. So I feel like this is probably enough of the buttercream to help it keep its shape. So I just keep continuing to mix that together and making it into kind of a tight dough. It almost looks like a cookie dough when it's ready. So I have just this little 1-inch little mini ice cream scooper, and I like to use that if I'm rolling by hand because it just helps me get each cake pop to be about the same size. So this first one, I went ahead and scraped off the excess so it was level and flush with the top of the scooper. And then I'm just rolling it in my palms to get it into a nice ball shape. So that's good. I'm setting that aside on a tray that's going to go into the freezer or refrigerator. Now, the second one, I decided I wanted it to be a little bit bigger. So I didn't scrape off the excess. I just kind of let it be over the top a little bit, because I felt like that first one I made was a little bit too tiny. So this one, I'm happy with the size, and you can see it is a little bit bigger, so I am going to go with that larger size. So you're just going to keep scooping until all of your dough is formed into cake pop balls. And again, I'm just setting those aside on a tray until I get all of it done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the chilling process. One of the biggest problems with cake pops is sometimes they'll fall apart when you dip them if they're not firm. Another thing is you can get cracking. You want your candy melt and your cake pop material. You don't want a big variation in the temperature, because if you dip a cold cake pop into really hot candy melt, then it will crack. Your chocolate will crack. So there I have them ready to go. I'm going to go put those into the freezer for a little bit, like maybe 5-10 minutes. And so the next step is to get ready to dip the sticks. So I have some popsicle sticks. I like to use these small jelly jars because they're a nice size. And then I'm using some candy melts. These are the Sweet Tooth Fairy brand. I really like those. But I do like to add a little bit of coconut oil to the melted candy melts to kind of help it smooth out a little bit. You can also buy, Wilton makes a product called Easy Thin, or you can also buy Paramount crystals, they're called. But I found that coconut oil works just as well. So for the amount of candy melts that I've put in this little jar, I'm just going to add maybe, I don't know, half a teaspoon of coconut oil. Not very much for that small amount. And again, it's just to help it melt smoothly. And so when you dip your cake pops, it's going to really run off nicely. So I have melted that in my microwave on partial power for like 2 minutes. I did 2 minutes on like a power level of 8 out of 10. You do not want to overheat your candy melts. You can even take them out of the microwave before they're completely melted and just stir them, because it will seize up and ruin if you heat it too much and too hot. So what I'm going to do, I've got my cake pops. These have been in the freezer chilling for about, 5-ish minutes. And what I'm going to do is just dip the very bottom of the popsicle stick into the melted candy melts. And then I'm going to gently press that straight down into the cake pop. What this does, when that candy melt hardens, it's going to glue the pop onto the stick so that when you dip it later, you'll have a much less chance of it falling off into the melted candy melts. So I'm just continuing to dip the bottom of each popsicle stick into a little bit of that melted candy melt. And I'm just pushing it down into the cake pop. I'm not pushing it all the way through. It's probably about 3/4 of the way through the cake pop. You don't want it poking through on the, the bottom side, which is actually going to be the top when it's flipped over. But those are going to be set aside to dry. And next is the fun part, the dipping it. So I have this handheld digital thermometer, and I have found that a good temperature for the candy melts before you're going to dip it needs to be around maybe like 103, 104 degrees, or even a little cooler. If it's too hot, again, you're going to get cracking in your cake pop. So I've just let it sit for a bit. It was still too hot. I just kept checking it periodically. Now it's at about 103, and I feel like that's about right. So I have my cool cake pops. Again, these are not directly out of the freezer because they need to be, not super, super cold, but just have a bit of a chill on them. And I'm just going to dip it straight down into that melted candy melt and slowly twist and let it meet that dried piece of candy melt that's holding it onto the stick. And then you're just going to very gently tap the stick kind of quickly. And I'm tapping the stick close to the cake pop itself. I feel like if you tap too far down on the stick, it's a lot of pressure, and your cake pop could potentially kind of fly off the end of the stick. Now, if you're going to add sprinkles, you have to do it right after you dip it, because that candy melt is going to harden pretty quickly. So immediately after you've shaken the excess off, you're going to add your sprinkles. I'm using these adorable little nonpareils. I love the look of them. So this is a nice kind of a darker pink on the light pink. I think it just looks really nice, but I'm just kind of pinching some in my fingers and twirling it around to see if I like the coverage. And then that is just going to get set aside to dry. And I put, if I'm doing pops, I have just a piece of styrofoam that I poke it into so that that can just sit upright and dry nicely before I wrap it. So I'm just going to continue dipping, and you can dip, it depends on the temperature in your room and everything, but as this candy melt starts to cool, you'll notice that it doesn't run off as nicely. It'll start to kind of get a little thicker, and you may need to rewarm it in your microwave. Probably just blasting it on like a power level 8 out of 10 if your microwave goes, as far as power levels up to 10, only for maybe 7 seconds at a time, just to get it warmed up enough so that you can, re-dip without getting clumps. But I think in this session, I was able to dip, I had 4. I think I was able to dip 3 of the 4 before I felt like that candy melt was getting a little too cool. So I felt like it was kind of thick, so I tested it again, and it's down a degree, and I was feeling like it was starting to get a little thick. So this is the last one that I dipped, and you'll see there's a spot here that it didn't cover all the way. So I've got that little bit that it kind of started to harden before it coated the whole thing nicely. And as I'm tapping, you can kind of see how it's not running off as smoothly as it did on the first few. So I'll show you in a second here. See how it's kind of clumpy because it's a little too cold. But since I'm covering it with the little nonpareils, I feel like it's okay. I don't think you would notice unless you looked really closely. But I would not dip another one without rewarming that candy melt. So I just kind of finished that off and set them all aside to side to dry. And so this is what they look like when they're all dry. So the very last step is to just wrap them up nicely for ready to be sold or handed out. But I use the little treat bags. They're short little ones, and then just a nice twist tie. And all you're gonna do, actually I'm gonna show you here in a second. Yeah, these are the bags I use. So they're 3" by 4" if I'm just covering the top of the pop. So these won't obviously go all the way down the stick, but they're enough to cover the cake pop part. So it's nice, and it's a cute presentation, and it protects it, and you can box it up if it's going into a gift bag, or if someone's ordering a lot of them for a party, you can, put them in a cake box, and they are protected from each other and kept nice and cute for your customer. So I'm just finishing it off with a twist tie. You can also add a little ribbon, or you can get the colored twist ties, but that is pretty much it. So those are some of your cake pop basics.